and welcome to the program. You're watching Head to Head, and this is Vivica Williams. Recently, a Ukraine-NATO Interparliamentary Council took place in Odessa. NATO member countries continue expressing their support for Ukraine. So what is this support about, and what does Ukraine need to do to be able to incorporate not just the values, but the practices of the North Atlantic Treaty? Today, to discuss this with us is political expert Jason Smart. Hello. Thanks for being with us, Jason.
Good to see you.
So let's start straight off. What does Ukraine need to do to be able to meet the standards of NATO? So we know that they've included this idea that in the Constitution that this is something they want to do, to join.
Right. Well, I think this we can interpret a few ways. I think it's specifically about the constitutional amendment that they wish to do, that Ukraine has a desire to one day join NATO. It's a political tool within its own country. It's something to be used for the Ukrainian population. It's very clear from all public statements that is the intent of this government. But at this point, they can't really do much about it because it really depends on NATO, not on Ukraine, whether or not they join. So if they at least make this step, I think it's a strategic political decision on how to allay the concerns of the general population that there are concrete steps being made to join NATO. Though, in fact, NATO has been very clear there's a lot of things that Ukraine needs to do. Right. Top of them, the corruption reforms, the reforms of the military, and as well as seeking to find a solution to Donbass, just because Donbass is an ongoing military conflict which precludes NATO membership.
Right. So then what we're looking at now is, of course, what happens often in Ukraine is this indication, this statement that we're going to do something, this creating of a law, and it's the implementation that's often the issue. So let's talk specifically about what needs to be done with reform in the military. So what are the main things that Ukraine needs to do?
Well, there's a number of things. I mean, one is that there is NATO standards for everything, whether it's weapons or organization of ranks or anything like this. And it has to come to this standard. The other thing that I think is important for the military is that it has to be reliable. I mean, the military has to be something that meets NATO rules in the sense that it is, if you are a member of NATO, you are there to also defend the other countries involved. And if tomorrow there was a conflict, let's say, in a European country that's a current member of NATO, Lithuania, can Ukraine respond in a way that is helpful to Lithuania? Can it actually come to its defense? And it's very clear to why Ukraine has interest in NATO. Once again, it does have an ongoing war with Russia, and Russian aggression is a direct threat to the state. That being said, okay, it's clear why you want to join. Now, what will you be able to provide others? And that is the big question. And I think one of the things that Ukraine would be very strategic and wise to do would be much more of a focus on that. Why is Ukraine in Lithuania's strategic interest or the United States' strategic interest? And that's what's missing frequently when you hear this debate. People aren't clear exactly why it is, okay, well, you want to be defended. That's obvious. But what are you going to do for us? I mean, how is this a two-way street? And I think that we have to be very clear when we're speaking to people about Ukraine and its importance, is that obviously Ukraine is the forefront of the war of Russian aggression. Russia has used computer technologies to attack European countries as well as the United States. But more right now, there's a hot war going on, thanks to Russia, in eastern Ukraine. And we can understand this is the buffer against a further attack in Western Europe that would then actually call in the rest of NATO. And right now, it is the Ukrainians who are stopping the advancing Russian aggression. And
so then we were looking at answering that question, what can Ukraine provide? So here comes this need to reform the military. And for example, one of the major issues Ukrainian military is known as the paper army. Right? So what do you see is being done to counter these huge bureaucratic issues in the military?
Unfortunately, there hasn't been enough done on this. There really hasn't. And this goes back to, it's very easy to talk about doing things. It's easy to talk about reforms. It's easy to talk about reforming the military. It's easy to talk about joining NATO. But the fact is that all these things are very hard. At the point of NATO, you're dealing with the world's most elite militaries, the top of the top of the top. And to compete at that level, to be at the MLB, you've got to be on that level. You've got to have people that are able to compete there, a military that's able to assist that at the very top rungs. And until there are serious reforms, I mean, I gotta be frank, is that as much as I think most Americans would probably support Ukraine joining NATO, and I think a lot of people understand the clear value of that, it's going to be a very, very hard road to pull unless you can come up with a clear idea, a clear vision as to why you're going to contribute to this effort and not just be a problem. But fundamental to that is the reforms. And once again, in the last few years, the reforms have been weak. Corruption remains endemic in the military. The New York Times just had a large article about that last week. And this corruption is something that is going to be a constant source of problems and headache. So if Ukraine could combat the corruption that is quite out of control in this country, then that would, I think, be the greatest step they could do for further NATO membership.
Absolutely. And because, as you said, this idea of countering corruption, it involves the entire country in all layers, not just the military. And that big step of having the independent anti-corruption court, which seems to be kind of always having some coming up across issues. It's going to be one of the major things to also tackling corruption in the military.
Well, it is very clear that the anti-corruption court is something that is necessary. This is something that's been said not only by the United States, by the IMF. It's just everywhere you go, you see this. And unfortunately, Poroshenko made the statement, it was yesterday or today, was it, where he said that we will not be making an anti-corruption court. It doesn't matter. This is, once again, a very disturbing trend. This is a country that is at war and needs international support more than probably any other time in its history. And to do something that is so blatantly not only in the interest of your own people, but in the interest of elaborating your further national interest to join NATO, to be further integrated to the European Union, is very troubling. I mean, this is a very clear step that is being demanded globally for Ukraine at this point.
Right, and that can be an entirely other conversation with talking about this issue with the anti-corruption court. But let's talk a little bit instead about what Ukraine is doing right. Like, how much do you see Ukraine's participation in the Trident Games being helpful to reform in the military?
I mean, it's nice to be invited along, but we have to understand the nature of the relationship. I think that when you invite people along to attend games or to assist in these sorts of things, what is that? I think that's a sign that, yes, we want to have you nearby, we'd like to keep you around, don't go anywhere else, but it's not a sign of commitment. It's not a sign that, well, you know, now we clearly see that you're ready to be further integrated. It's simply a sign that, you know, we haven't ruled this out yet. And this goes back to, once again, this fundamental problem, which is the need for reforms. And this is what everybody is demanding.
And do you see any of this trickling down? I mean, I feel that a lot will start with the young officers with retraining and providing the great training for the younger officers, especially ones that maybe participate in the Trident Games. Do you see them being able to make some changes, or is this also coming down to the system as itself standing as this big obstacle?
I think that's just the problem, exactly that. It's endemic systemic corruption that goes throughout the entire country, and very clearly through the military as well. Military acquisitions being a major one, as you know. As this continues, if you look at the international community and their desire to help, again, you look at the corruption within the Ukroobron, who's in charge of all the military expenditures, or purchases rather. And what do we find there? Massive corruption, complete lack of desire to do any reforms that would be in the national security interest of Ukraine. And if you are actually going to jeopardize your own security, then it actually creates a risk for other countries to cooperate with you. I mean, if we have our soldiers cooperating here and something were to happen, this is a disaster. We have to be very careful.
So what do you think is going to kickstart real change? We have the war in Donbass going on, and you say, you know, we see here that has this led to any changes that are in the more positive direction in the military, or is it not making as many changes as you would think having a war in your country should?
I would hope that there would be more reforms in a country that realizes the existential threat posed by the Russian Federation. Unfortunately, that has not been what has come to the forefront. It's been this lack of desire, such as we see today with the anti-corruption court deciding, well, we're not going to do that. But why? It's necessary. Everybody realizes corruption is a massive problem. But we don't have to. Nobody can dictate to us what to do. Okay, so I mean, you can have all these aspirations. You can put in your constitution that you want to join NATO. But easier than talking, easier than writing a piece of paper, why don't we do something serious? Why don't we say, listen, we want to show you in a good faith how much we are committed to this. And it's more than just writing in the Constitution, which can change tomorrow. We are going to start top-down serious reforms. We're going to put people in jail who are engaged in corruption. We are going to find those who are overcharging the government. We are going to make sure that weapons that are stolen are returned. And we are going to provide for the security of our people. I mean, all the polling in Ukraine shows that national security remains the top concern for citizens about the future of the country, namely the war in Donbass, followed by corruption is the second biggest issue. And when you look at these polling numbers, you can understand that the population is seeing their worst nightmare really come true. One, they're worried about the war that is ongoing. But secondly, they realize that the corruption is so bad that the war is hard to fight and hard to conclude. As such, if this government wants to really make reforms, it should start with the corruption fight universally, but specifically in the military first, perhaps.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for this insight, Jason, and we're going to hope that we see in this next few years that there's some real changes that are going to be made.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks.
Today we spoke with Jason Smart, a political expert, about Ukraine and NATO. Thank you for watching UATV.